His Excellency Mr. Gong Wei Bin, Vice President of the Party School of the Communist Party of China, Central Committee, Vice President of the Chinese National Academy of Governance, His Excellency Mr. Xie Dao, Vice President of the Party School of the Communist Party of China, Central Committee, Vice President of the Chinese National Academy of Governance, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. I thank the Party School of the Communist Party of China, Central Committee, and the Chinese National Academy of Governance for inviting me to address the opening of the 2022 International Conference on Innovative Emergency Management. Wide-ranging conflicts from Ukraine to Yemen to Somalia to Afghanistan to Syria have devastated lives and livelihoods, and the COVID-19 pandemic has left no corner of the world untouched. From the heat waves in Florida, devastating floods in Pakistan, and the worst droughts in 4 decades in the Horn of Africa, the world is now being ravaged by increasing disaster events fueled by the climate crisis. These disasters have had tremendous human and economic costs that threaten decades of development gains and further derail global progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2021 alone, the world saw 432 disastrous events related to natural hazards, with an estimated $252 billion of economic damage reported. If current trends continue, the number of disasters per year globally may increase to 560 per year by 2030 under a worst-case scenario or no action scenario on climate change. An additional 100.7 million people will be pushed into poverty by this time, according to the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, or UNDRR. In the growing number of catastrophic events causing undue suffering around the world, there lies an uncomfortable truth. As the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, said in his opening remarks at COP27 summit, and I quote, "Those who have contributed least to the climate crisis are reaping the whirlwind sown by others," end of quote. We need to be better prepared, especially for the most vulnerable groups, to address climate risks, invest in more resilient societies, and leave no one behind. We are not short of international cooperation mechanisms in preventing and reducing disaster risk. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 was the first major agreement of the post-2015 development agenda and provides member states with concrete actions to protect development gains from the risk of disaster. The Sendai Framework works hand in hand with the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Addis Ababa Agenda for Financing for Development, and ultimately the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 13 on climate action. Here, UNDRR oversees the implementation of the Sendai Framework, supporting countries in its implementation, monitoring and sharing what works in reducing existing risk and preventing the creation of a new risk. Innovation and cooperation are clearly essential to the effective management and mitigation of emergencies. But we need further action through enhanced political will, public policies and partnerships to operationalize our internationally agreed commitments and mechanisms. On political will, at COP27, the world reached a breakthrough agreement on a loss and damage fund for vulnerable countries. However, member states still need to ramp up their climate ambition and take concrete steps to operationalize the loss and damage fund as soon as possible. We count on major powers, including China and the United States of America, to lead the way and work together to reduce potential losses in lives, livelihoods, and economies and basic infrastructure, in line with the international agreement for reducing global disaster risk and losses. On public policy, the COVID-19 pandemic shows us how people and societies can adopt new behaviors when challenges and priorities are clearly set out by governments. But this experience also shows us that the best defense against future shocks is to build resilience today by reducing vulnerabilities and inequalities that help drive the disasters. Here, increasing the availability of people-centered and multi-hazard early warning system along the disaster risk information can help countries with their national and local strategies to enable early action that minimize harm to people, assets, and livelihoods. On partnerships, investing in disaster risk reduction requires international cooperation and partnerships, particularly in assisting developing countries with their resilience efforts. This can occur through useful frameworks such as the official development assistance, the South-South and triangular cooperation, along with the efforts of all sectors of societies, including governments at every level, the private sector, civil society, academia, and young people to leverage their much-needed resources and innovation. Often, at the front lines of disasters, we can also rely better on knowledge of local and indigenous communities while enabling their meaningful participation towards building resilience globally. On all these fronts, the United Nations and China stands ready to offer its support, technical expertise, and network to facilitate further cooperation on emergency management and disaster risk reduction. I wish today's forum every success. Thank you very much. 谢谢。